Alright guys, here's the second half of the Note C that you want to do for tonight, and it has to do with what else happened during the election of 1804. Now, to understand what happens in 1804, you also want to look back maybe a little bit and remember what happened in 1800, where Jefferson was running for the second time against Adams, and he needed to try a different strategy in order to win that first election. And it was actually his friend, James Madison, that encouraged him to take up Aaron Burr as his vice president. Being Burr being a Federalist, he thought that he would help him carry some additional states and some additional votes that he would need. And it did work. In fact, bringing Aaron Burr along, the Federalist candidate, allowed them to win New York. But you might recall in that election of 1800, or Revolution that we call it now, there was actually a tie at first. And Jefferson kind of thought he was going to lose the election, and he looked to Burr to kind of settle the matter, as Burr could have just removed himself from the ballot, but he never did. And Jefferson kind of thought that that was Burr's attempt to try to steal the presidency from him and steal the White House. And so because of that, Jefferson really lost all trust that he had in Burr. He's really not going to involve him in a lot of political decisions. He's really going to try to keep his distance. And when the election of 1804 comes around, he's actually going to remove Burr from the ticket and run instead with a guy named George Clinton, who he trusted and who he thought would help him win instead of Burr. And so for Aaron Burr, that really left him in a political isolation. He had switched parties in 1800, and now he was thinking about switching back, and he decided that if he wasn't going to be able to be vice president, then he was going to run for the governorship of New York, and he was going to run as a Federalist again. Now, this was made possible because of a group of very extreme Federalists that had been plotting secession for the northern states. These states down here, Aaron Burr was going to take them and possibly, or at least the group wanted to take these states and possibly think about secession, which is really a funny thing to think about. Northern states seceding, when we know in the 1860s it's the southern states that secede. But it really tells you about the volatility of how the states viewed themselves in this Constitution and in this Union. And while Burr never made promises to lead these states in secession, he never really exposed the conspiracy either. And so he was kind of seen as a little bit of a shady character. And when he started running for governorship, as you can might imagine, it was Alexander Hamilton who kind of caught word of this, and Hamilton was horrified. Hamilton said, "Oh my gosh, at all costs, we have to keep this union together." And so he started writing letter after letter after letter, about how we couldn't trust Burr and how Burr can't be elected governor. He considered him a very dangerous politician, and kind of how he flip-flopped back and forth. And this is really where this long-standing feud really comes to a turning point here between Burr and Hamilton, because remember, in 1800 it was Hamilton that kept Burr from winning the presidency, and here he is again in 1804 keeping Burr from being able to win the governorship. And you can imagine that Burr, after he loses this governorship because of Hamilton, is just fuming. If I could draw little fumes coming out of Aaron Burr's head, I would, like right here, just really upset at what Hamilton's doing. And so, he's a little hot, and it kind of cools down until both men, after the race was over, met at a dinner party, and it was overheard by a few guests that Hamilton is kind of referring to Burr as this despicable man, that there was this public insult. And when it was published in the newspaper the next day, Burr kind of walked up to Hamilton and said, "You know what, man? When we can't solve our differences, what else can we do but duel?" Because in the early 1800s, dueling was the way to go. Now, most times this dueling was kind of seen as a sign that you were willing to give up your lives in order to defend your honor. In fact, there were over 20 duels in the state of New York in just the previous years before that. Now, 19 of those duels actually just resulted in a stalemate. Neither men shot at each other, because dueling was actually illegal unless you were one of the elite, and certainly Burr and Hamilton would be one of those elite. And so, they kind of said, all right, we'll go through this. We'll kind of show the public we're willing to do this. And Hamilton signed up for that. And just before dawn on July 11th of 1804, these two men stood up, walked their 10 paces and turned and faced each other. And I want you to kind of take a special look. We'll look deeply at these in class, at the different representations of the duel here. But what we do know is this. The two men walked 20 paces, and Hamilton was the first to raise his pistol. Some say that he fired into the air. Others say that he shot and missed. But what we do know is that after he fired, Burr was untouched. And Burr then took aim and did not miss. And in fact, Aaron Burr shot Hamilton in the lower abdomen right above the hip. The bullet ricocheted off his rib and lodged directly in his spine. And Hamilton will be dead within 36 hours. And so what we have here, folks, is the Vice President of the United States killing the Secretary of the Treasury. Right? This is early American politics. This is really crazy. And Burr gets tried for murder. And he kind of runs away for a while. Here are some different depictions. Take a minute to look through these on your own, and we're going to discuss these more in class and the different ways that these look. I'm going to assign you ones, and we're going to look in detail about the differences between them. But, Hamilton is now been killed, and killed in such a silly fashion, really. And we now have this Aaron Burr phenomenon. What do we do with this guy? Well, when we started looking into Aaron Burr and some of his, background, what the Justice Department of the United States started finding was actually pretty chilling. In addition to being involved in that secessionist plot and killing Alexander Hamilton, we also found out that while he was the vice president, Burr had actually contacted none other than Great Britain. He contacted the British minister and had actually started talking about plans to lead a military expedition to try to detach some portions of the United States. I mean, what we're talking about here is Aaron Burr, as the sitting vice president, was plotting treason. And he was plotting to bring in a foreign power to fight back against the very country that he almost became the president of. And it's this crazy story because when they brought all of this in, they brought it into Chief Justice John Marshall. Remember, John Marshall's the head of the Supreme Court. And John Marshall, in an amazing kind of decision here, finds Burr innocent of treason and innocent of what he did, not blaming him and saying that it has to be an overt act and that Burr didn't commit that. And I just want you to remember that Marshall is this Federalist candidate, and he has, always defended the Federalist agenda. And then Burr, as a Federalist, Marshall kind of defends him and decides to find him not guilty. And so here is Burr. Burr was acquitted, but he's now kind of a political outcast. He is not going to be involved in politics anymore, and he flees. He flees to Europe, and he lives in exile there until 1812. So he lives over there for about 8 years, and he comes back in 1812 under this alias called Aaron Edwards. And he lives in New York for another 24 years as a lawyer, and kind of never really remakes himself, but kind of lives in an anonymous lifestyle. And I mean, how crazy is this? This is the guy who almost was our president in 1800, killed Alexander Hamilton, talked about secession and leaving the Union and bringing the northern states with him, and even contacted the British Prime Minister to see if he could start his own war. This is nuts. This is early American politics. I mean, this is what I mean when I was talking to you guys about the fact that American politics and the founding of our country is an experiment. We are learning on the fly, which makes it so interesting. And situations like, Aaron Burr and the Jefferson-Hemmings affair really show how our founding fathers have given us some incredible goals to work towards, but the path and the way that we get there is really very still much up to the people living it and experiencing it. So those are our two conspiracies, the Sally Hemings affair and the Aaron Burr conspiracy. I hope you come ready to class to talk about them. They're a lot of fun. They have a lot going on. And that's what we will work on in class the next time I see you. So thanks for listening. I'm sorry the two videos were a little longer than I wanted, but there's some really, really good stuff, and we're going to dive into a lot more of this once we come into class. All right.